Welcome to Unbelievable Stories. Today's story is full of shocking twists and real drama. Subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's dive in.
Sweetheart's Day, October 19th, fell on a Saturday this year, and when I arrived to Willow Creek Bistro, it was already fairly filled. I was seated just 3 minutes before my 6:30 reservation. I gave the server my drink order, thanked him, and asked to be seated myself. He nodded calmly and placed 2 menus on my table. I sat with my back to the wall, a basic grey Spanish bottle bag on the unoccupied seat opposite from me and a huge green card envelope lying against it. I had arrived alone and early. As I gazed around the room, I felt claustrophobic, a sense I hadn't encountered in almost 5 years of pandemic lockdowns interspersed by short times of eased controls. It had been exactly 5 years since I last sat at our favourite table. By regular, I mean we used to schedule it once every 6 weeks, always well in advance for our date evenings. Tonight, the restaurant was packed with modest 2-person tables appropriate for the occasion. However, after almost 5 years of constraints and social separation, the space seemed crammed rather than personal. I realized I'd been acclimated to solitude, both from the lockdowns and from working alone at home for so long. The waiter returned with a bottle, uncorked it, and poured a sample into a glass for me to try. After consenting, I asked for a half glass and he left me to my thoughts. Only 3 or 4 of the 20 to 25 little tables in this section of the restaurant were unoccupied, one of which was immediately next to mine. Without looking attentively, I assumed my table was the only one with a single person seated at it. I had, of course, reserved for 2, and before I realized Sophia was running late as usual, I heard a gentle beep from my mobile phone, signaling that a message had arrived. I retrieved it from my jacket pocket and clicked the button to turn it on. The time instantly displayed 19:45. I always set my phone and digital clocks to 24 hours. I've been a freelance feature writer for over 10 years, but as a young journalist, I spent 18 years at the Hillcrest Times, beginning as a copper holder, handling minor advertisements and general gopher. Then I advanced to junior reporter, senior reporter, and sub-editor, mostly on the late afternoon and nighttime shifts. While words and facts are crucial in newspapers, deadlines are extremely necessary. As I stroked and touched the screen to access my messages, I couldn't help but notice that the unoccupied table to my left was filled. The lady of a happy couple brushed past me in a woolen coat and long navy blue dress to get to her seat by the wall, making me smile for only the second time today, not warmly, as I was long past doing so, but it was a chilly February night in our part of the world, and my wife's preferred seat, had she arrived on time, would have been the wall seat where I now sat, comfortably in front of the radiator. No, I did not grin for Sophia. I hadn't even seen her this morning, since she had supposedly departed early for a strategy meeting at work. I just smiled for my kids when I sent them off at school, kissed them, and urged them to be very good tonight. I questioned if I would be able to do the same. I had arranged for Sophia's parents to pick them up from school and keep them overnight, allowing Sophia and me to spend our anniversary without worrying about Nathan and Grace. When previously said, the tables were pretty close together, and when the woman went by me through the little space, I received a breath of her wonderful scent. It smelled lovely, rich, and tempting when it initially hit the senses, but it became light and flowery as it remained on the palate, a scent that would elicit feelings and likely pleasure whomever was with her. Lucky partner, I thought, moving my gaze away from my phone screen to momentarily peek to the seat directly opposite, where the new arrival's spouse was to sit. But the seat was vacant. I could only see the rear of the leaving Metro D, Christopher Jr., the owner's fresh-faced son, racing off to greet the next pair waiting at the entry. It seemed that the lovely-smelling woman was waiting for her boyfriend, just as I was waiting on my quite tardy wife, my wife of 14 years, precisely to the day. We always came to this table, or at least this table location. Sometimes a different table would be there, as we had requested space for 4 or 6 with high seats on special occasions. However, only lately have rules permitted for this. This is where we had our first date, where I proposed to Sophia and she accepted, and where we celebrated all of our family birthdays and anniversaries, including today. The anniversary date was romantic for us for more than one reason. It was also the day we married, on Thursday, March 22, 2013, at the local registrar's office. We were both 33 at the time, and Sophia's biological clock was ticking away. Sophia was already pregnant with our son, Nathan, which I was unaware of at the time. She just informed me on our wedding night that she was 2 weeks late for her period, which she hadn't realized until that morning. With all of the tension building up to the wedding and not seeing me before the ceremony, she postponed telling me until we were alone afterward. Not that I wouldn't have done the right thing if it hadn't been our wedding night. I'd wanted to marry Sophia before I ever asked her. We were already living together, had been together for precisely 6 years, and had been planning the wedding for months. Sophia was the right person for me at the moment. She may have been late 14 years ago, but she was regularly late today. She was clearly late on our 10th wedding anniversary 3 years ago. I was here waiting for her on my own, looking at the wooden wall, prompted by a similar running late notification on an earlier phone. I had stuck in there until 8:30 that night, when I had to give up the table, leaving with a sense of failure as I walked away from a room full of passionate couples, feeling like I was doing a solo walk of shame on Sweetheart's Day. I insisted on paying the estimated cost of a lunch for two at the front desk before departing. Andrew, the restaurant owner, apologized for asking me to leave, but it was Sweetheart's Day, and all of the tables were reserved for the next session. This occurred barely 4 or 5 weeks before the first lockdown started. I met Sophia at a wedding in mid-January 18 years ago, when we were both about 29. I knew the groom from college, and she went to the same school as the bride. I was working unsociable hours at the newspaper most evenings, from the afternoon until well after midnight, and I didn't have a partner or many possibilities to meet one. Sophia was studying hard to become a lawyer and concentrate on her examinations, so she attended the wedding alone. During our chats, we learned that we both resided in the same town and commuted to Stonehaven for work. My weekend used to be Thursday and Friday due to my shift schedule, and she proposed we meet in a couple of weeks on Friday. We checked our calendars and scheduled a date for March 22nd at this cafe, where I had never dined before. Sophia added that she had previously worked as a server here during school and college vacations, as well as weekends while still in school. If that date goes well, she informed me, we can exchange phone numbers and take it from there. I didn't realize the importance of the date until I got home, and I assumed it was a joke. A first date for Sweetheart's Day. Get real. She was a lovely girl, and I was just a regular guy, so she was clearly playing me. I believe she was simply having fun at my expense and would inform the bride when she returned from her honeymoon. She had informed me that she had reserved the table, so the prank would be free of charge. But, as the day approached, I questioned whether she was sincere. If she was actually interested in me and I let her down, my name would be dirt with my old college friend, and I'd never have another shot with this beautiful lady. And if she was stringing me along for a joke, it would cost me nothing to show up at the appropriate time, and if she didn't show up within, say, 10 minutes, I would leave, and the restaurant could still cover that table without too much trouble. When I arrived on time that evening and asked the maitre d' whether there was a reservation for Sophia Summers, I was told, "Certainly, sir, she is waiting for you." And there she was, looking as lovely as a painting and wonderfully delicious. As previously said, I have always worked under tight constraints and am used to being resourceful and completing tasks on time. I felt to be my Valentine card for a first date would be tacky and humiliating for both of us, so I spoke with the studio supervisor in the print department, and one of the country's top daily cartoonists created a wonderful cartoon design. The print department color printed a "Be Yours Next Year's Valentine" card with a caricature of me wearing thick chains around my chest, locked in place by a massive padlock, and a pounding heart behind all that metal. There was also a caricature of Sophia with her features taken from one of the wedding photos, holding a blazing acetylene torch and an open, hinged welder helmet on her head, captioned, "Unlock my heart, but please don't melt it." She laughed when she opened the envelope and saw the card, signed by an admirer who wants to get to know you better. We immediately discovered that we were comfortable with one another, and throughout the evening, we agreed to date again, then became exclusive. After many months of intense courtship, we moved into my modest apartment as a couple. We committed to one another a few years later by exchanging engagement rings, but it took another 3 years for us to marry and begin shopping for a family home in our hometown. By then, we were both dedicated to our careers. I was a sub-editor in addition to producing regular weekend feature stories, and I knew it would be years before I became a full-fledged editor. Sophia wanted to return to work as a lawyer, focusing in business law, when baby Nathan was about 2 years old, so I went freelancing, writing and doing housework. Besides, our youngest, Grace, was a surprise baby, unplanned but adored just as much as Nathan, and Sophia only had a few months with Grace before returning to work. Grace is Daddy's daughter, and I've been both her father and mother for the last 7 years. Nathan is laid back and reliant on his family. Sophia was ready to return to work right after Grace and obtain her junior partnership. Sophia, on the other hand, does not seem to be pleased with me these days. Last February, we were under lockdown and everything was closed, so we, or rather, I had Chinese takeout brought to our home. When I went to bed alone, I left Sophia's uneaten part in the fridge. "Work," she said. The same justification, which was becoming old by then. Apparently, as a mergers and acquisitions lawyer, there is always a critical prospectus to write or a new takeover response that requires all of the firm's legal wits to stay concentrated until the early hours of the morning, multiple times a week. This year, I had reserved the table from 18:30 until closing time many weeks before and had previously paid an expected amount for up to 4 ordinary a la carte meals and beverages with Andrew when I stopped in. He objected that it was unneeded, reminding me that Sophia had served tables there as a student for 4 years, some 20 years ago, therefore the distance between his cafe and my family was somehow justified. However, I insisted on paying in advance. I was resigned to the view of the restaurant with my back to the wall, but I could understand why Sophia preferred this seat. It was an excellent location, even without a heater in a chilly winter. Everyone was entering this section of the cafe, as well as the bar area beyond it and the front door. All I could see from my facing seat was my dinner companion and the wooden wall behind them. No surprise my wife chose this as our favorite table. The message, I remembered to glance at the message that had beeped on my phone. Sorry, hun, still at work. 60 minutes. The message meant more to me than words. Even the L and 60 meant less key presses dedicated to me and more of her valuable time spent doing whatever she preferred. I grinned for the third time today, a non-humorous smile. I hadn't reminded Sophia of the date and hour of the supper, nor had I mentioned our anniversary since last year. Now I was sitting alone, like a lemon, while Sophia was busy somewhere else. Even on Sweetheart's Day, our 12th wedding anniversary, she had somewhere else to be. 12 is the silk anniversary, isn't it? I wondered casually. That reminded me of the lady sitting next to me, who wore a forest green silk dress. I could still smell her scent, or maybe just remember it. It was unlike any of the ones my wife has chosen over the years. I guess that various preferences result in diverse options. I wondered whether the lady in green, who was seated alone, was here to celebrate a similar anniversary on a date with a boyfriend, spouse, or lover, or if she just preferred green tonight over whatever else was in her wardrobe. I had little appetite this evening, but I set my phone down on the table and picked up the menu. I decided to attempt a starter, if only to soak up the odd few of sips from the half glass of wine that the waiter had poured me from Sophia's favorite bottle of bourbon. It wasn't my typical drink, but I wasn't in the mood for something heavier. Maybe later at home, I'd cook a sandwich and have a beer. Looks like we've both been stood up, said a husky female voice from the table next to me, slightly louder than the background discussion, piercing my chilly veil of loneliness like a hot knife. I glanced up and to my left. Despite the low illumination, neither mine nor her candles were yet lighted. Her open face, dark brown eyes, and soft black wavy hair that fell to her shoulders, framing her face, made her a great beauty. Sorry, I answered, I was miles away. Was that wishful thinking? She inquired quietly. Now that she had my attention, a little grin appeared on her lips, hesitant yet welcoming, enticing me into discussion. Maybe, I shrugged. I took a quick check at my phone before returning my attention to her. She's still at work, she says. She's running late, and I'm not sure if she'll even make it tonight. I paused the last time, thinking it was too much information for a stranger who was probably looking forward to a beautiful romantic meal more than I was. Then I thought, to hell with it. I'd kept this bottled up for far too long. Last time, she never made it at all. Last time, what, last week, or whenever? She inquired. Last year, I corrected. No, sorry, not last year. Actually, 5 years ago. You know, back before everything changed. This day, 3 years ago, was our 10th. This year, tonight is another anniversary, our 12th. Blimey. 12. That's silk, isn't it? Silk as in a silk scarf or maybe silk pajamas, she thought with a sorrowful grin, most likely recalling some of her own terrible recollections. Comfort fabric, I said, something soft and warm when things aren't going so well, like a comfort blanket. Or a silk handkerchief, she continued with a knowing grin, for drying tears. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. That's okay, I responded. I guess she's otherwise occupied tonight. What is she, a doctor or a nurse? She inquired. For some professions, their work is vitally important, and staffing can be an issue. Sometimes, the relief shift can't come in, and those left behind have to keep everything going. You know, life or death situations can be more important even than a date. No, she's a lawyer, I said. Oh, she said, lifting an eyebrow. A lawyer, huh? Well, they have their own emergencies, I suppose. Yeah, emergencies, I responded, smiling and shrugging. She made junior partner 3 years ago and well, the workload absolutely took off, or so she tells me. The lady next to me was young and gorgeous, obviously looking forward to a night out and probably not expecting to hear about my issues. I wasn't wanting to unload on her, but rather psychologically prepare for the possibility of having to move on to the next level. Well, she said, at least she's not a school principal. Imagine being responsible for all those kids and staff. Oh, is that what you are? I inquired. Sort of, she replied. I run a daycare center. In the proprietor, or should that be proprietress, of a place for preschoolers. It's called Bright Horizon School. Preschool. Not as bad as a secondary school principal, then, I quipped. You've probably got lots of sweet little kids, aged 2 to 5, I'd guess. A nice age for children, if I remember correctly. True, they are sweet, she said, but we start with toddlers as young as 18 months. I have a great team that loves working with the little ones. She chuckled, more for herself than anything else. I must admit, I do love the littlies too. Sometimes I hate handing some of them back to their parents at the end of the day. Oh God, I said. I remember the terrible twos all too well. Nathan wasn't so bad, but Grace was a handful. She always needed her mom, and Sophia was working hard to secure that junior partnership when Grace needed her at home. They are not so bad, she said, laughing. At least we can hand the troublesome few back at the end of the day. We always make sure they sit quietly for a snack, then lunch, and then they get their heads down for quiet time. They do mostly drop off, even if just for a little while. So you can get the kettle on, then? She asked. Certainly, she said. Tea and biscuits for the staff. Essential me time. She laughed again. So, I take it you have young children too? Was my response. Not anymore, unfortunately, she said, her grin dimming somewhat. My daughter is 16 now. But I do enjoy working with the little ones at the daycare. It keeps me busy. The phone beeped again. Excuse me, I just want to get this message, I said, taking up the phone. The time was 2010. Sophia had sent an additional message. Sorry, hun, more LS to file. Getting Thai takeout. VL9. I turned to face the lady. Sophia, that's my wife of 14 years, she's not going to make it tonight. And she's already ordered Thai for herself at work. Oh, that's a shame, the lady responded with sympathy. You got her a card, and is that a bottle? Well, it's a special occasion, I said. We missed each other this morning in passing. It's not a bottle in the bag, actually, it's a novelty storage tin. Looks like a 1960s tin of peaches, but it's empty and has a removable lid. You can use it for keeping little things in. Comes as a set of 6. I only brought one along to present to her. Oh, that's a nice idea, she responded, smiling. It fits perfectly with the silk anniversary theme. Thoughtful. I thought so, I said, realizing I had been rambling on. Sorry for being rude, my name is David, I responded, extending my hand with a sheepish grin. The tables were so close together that she didn't even have to bend across to softly shake my hand. She grinned much more warmly than I could ever do. I'm Megan, she continued, but you can call me Megan. She laughed. Sorry, couldn't resist. When you said, my friends call me David. I laughed with her. Well, my birth name is Davidson. My mom named me after her favorite actor, but I've always gone by David. I see, she said. By explanation, I'm really Megan, but I like it. And it goes well with my married name, Megan Hartwell, even though I'm not exactly married anymore. I kept the name after I divorced. Was he blind or simply stupid? I said without thinking. Stupid, definitely, she responded without skipping a beat. He cheated and thought he could get away with it. The pompous idiot. She shrugged. I'm over it now, though. It's been nearly 7 years. I can't stand cheaters, I said. If a relationship isn't working, at least have the honesty to end it before moving on. Exactly, she said, nodding. But he was definitely stupid. She smiled at me, revealing a dimple on her left cheek. We spoke for a time, exchanging anecdotes about our lives and families, and the discussion flowed effortlessly between us. Megan had been divorced for about 7 years and had a daughter, Hannah, who was in junior high school. I told her about Nathan and Grace, as well as how I had started a freelance writing profession so that I could spend more time with them. As we chatted, I observed the restaurant was still busy, with waiters sliding between tables delivering trays of food. The fragrance of roasting meat and flavorful sauces permeated the air. I had almost forgotten I was here for an anniversary dinner, and I felt at ease for the first time in a long time. My phone was quiet. Sophia has stopped sending messages. I groaned internally and returned my focus to Megan, who was discussing her enthusiasm for operating the daycare and how satisfying it was to help mold the lives of young children. "Look, David," Megan began, pausing herself to look at the time on her phone. "I know you were going to have a starter, and am absolutely starving. My first time out on a date in years, and I couldn't eat a thing all day. I was too nervous." "Well," I answered, feeling a spark of something that hadn't been there all evening, "I'm still here, and the food is supposed to be excellent. If you're hungry, would you like to share this table with me? We could leave the other one free for a couple who might otherwise be turned away." Megan grinned brightly. "That sounds like a lovely idea. After all, tonight is for lovers, or at least for good company." "Great," I responded, shifting the tin and envelope from the place setting opposite me to the floor beside my chair, out of the way. "Why don't you join me over here? If Sophia does show up, you'll give me a heads up, and I'll be prepared." Megan chuckled softly, her eyes glittering in the candlelight. "I'd be happy to. And don't worry, I'm sure we can avoid any dramatic scenes." She rose up, pointing to Christopher, the maître d', who observed us and nodded in acknowledgement. He moved quickly to seat a couple who had just arrived at the entrance, directing them to Megan's now empty table. I saw Megan remove her coat and put it over her chair before sitting down across from me. As she sat down, I poured her a glass of wine from the bottle I had already opened and topped up my own glass. She smiled and thanked me, and we both took a drink, allowing the wine's warmth to soothe us. "So, David," she began as she sipped her wine, "what do you think we should order? I used to work in the kitchen here while I was in college, so I know a few of the chef's specialties." "That's a great insider tip," I said. "I'd say you should pick the starter. I trust your judgment." She examined the menu carefully. "How about the mushroom risotto to start? It's one of the best dishes here. Creamy, rich, but not too heavy." "Sounds perfect," I remarked, motioning to Christopher to take our order. Megan ordered the risotto as he arrived, and we both chose pan-seared fish for the main dish. We kept speaking after the order was placed, seamlessly changing between our occupations, families, and varied hobbies. "So, your kids, Nathan and Grace," Megan continued. "It sounds like you've been really hands-on with them." "Yeah, I have," I said. It wasn't the original plan, but when Grace was born and Sophia was so focused on her career, it just made sense for me to work from home. It's been challenging, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. They are amazing kids." "That's fantastic," Megan said. "Hannah was only 11 when I got divorced. I had to juggle a lot back then, trying to get the daycare up and running while being there for her. But she's been my rock, really. I'm so proud of the young woman she's becoming." "I can imagine," I said. "Teenagers can be tricky, but it sounds like you're doing an amazing job." We hesitated as the waiter delivered the risotto to our table. The scent was appealing, and I felt my hunger stir for the first time that evening. We each took a mouthful, and Megan was correct, the meal was wonderful. As we ate, the restaurant became livelier, with a lively environment. I observed the elderly couple who had taken Megan's former table. They seemed joyful, smiling and joking together. It made me reflect on how different things were than I had imagined tonight. "Funny how life takes us in directions we never saw coming," I said aloud. "Tell me about it," Megan agreed. 5 years ago, I thought I'd still be married, raising my daughter with my husband by my side. But things change. Sometimes for the better, even if it doesn't feel that way at first." "I suppose you're right," I answered. "When I look back, I can see all the signs. But at the time, I just didn't want to face them." Megan looked at me kindly. "It sounds like you've been carrying a lot on your own, David." I shrugged. I just never imagined it would get to this point. Even tonight, a part of me thought Sophia might show up, and things would somehow go back to how they used to be. She stretched across the table and put her hand on mine. "I know it's hard, but sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward." I nodded, sensing the weight of her words. "You're right. It's difficult to let go of something you thought was forever." We both went quiet for a time before I cleared my throat. "But enough about me. What about you? Any plans to get back into the dating scene, or are you just focusing on work and Hannah?" Megan laughed gently. "Well, tonight was supposed to be my first step back into dating, but you can see how that turned out." She smiled as she motioned across the room. His loss, I said truly. You're great company, Megan. I'm glad we ended up at the same place tonight. Thanks, David, she said, her gaze finding mine. I'm glad too. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed a conversation this much. The remainder of the evening was a blissful blur. The fish was perfectly cooked and we finished with a delectable chocolate dessert. As the night progressed, I became more at ease and I nearly forgot why I had gone to the restaurant in the first place. Finally, it was time to pay the bill. I grabbed for my wallet, but Megan stopped me. No way, you've already been more than generous. Let me at least split it with you. I shake my head. Absolutely not. You're my guest and I'd like to treat you. She pondered for a moment before smiling gratefully. All right, if you insist. But next time, dinner's on me. Next time, huh? I said, lifting my eyebrow. Why not? She said, her eyes gleaming. After all, you still owe me that birthday dinner in July, remember? How could I forget? I said, looking back at her. August 12th. It's already marked on my calendar. As we got our jackets and prepared to depart, I accompanied Megan to her pickup vehicle. The night air was crisp and the stars were starting to show through the clouds. We halted near her pickup vehicle and she turned to face me. Thank you for tonight, David. It was unexpectedly wonderful, she murmured quietly. Thank you, Megan. I enjoyed it too. More than I thought I would, I told you. We remained there for a time, the air between us filled with unsaid possibilities. I wasn't sure what would happen next, whether there would be another time, or if this was the one wonderful evening. But when she leaned in and kissed my face gently, I felt something shift, like a new beginning was taking form. Good night, David, she muttered. Good night, Megan, I said, seeing her get into her pickup truck and drive away. As I went to my own pickup vehicle, I couldn't help but reflect on how my sweetheart's day had not gone as anticipated. However, life has a strange habit of shocking you when you least expect it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of optimism. As I strolled back to my pickup vehicle, I noticed an unusual lightness in my stride. The evening had turned out far differently than I had expected. What started out as a lonely anniversary meal turned into a night of good discussion, surprising laughs, and a glimmer of hope for something new. I hadn't even considered checking my phone again, it was still in my pocket, forgotten for the first time in a long while. I approached my pickup vehicle, took a big breath, and dug the keys out of my coat pocket. Before I could open the door, my phone buzzed and vibrated against my side. I paused, not sure whether I wanted to read another message from Sophia, but curiosity won out. I picked out my phone and looked at the screen, a text from her. David, I came by the restaurant earlier. Saw you with someone. I went home. We need to talk. My heart dropped and the optimistic sensation that had just begun to bloom seemed like it was fading. I leaned against the pickup truck, chilly metal pushing against my coat, and reread the note. It was short yet dense, with several levels of connotation. It was not something I wanted to deal with just now, especially after such an unexpectedly lovely evening. However, I knew I couldn't ignore it either. I took a big breath and wrote, "We can talk tomorrow. I'll be home later." Hitting send, I slid the phone back into my pocket, trying to concentrate on the sense of optimism Megan had instilled in me rather than the impending encounter. I got into the pickup truck, started the motor, and drove out of the parking lot, my mind jumbled between the happenings of the evening and the unknowns that awaited me at home. The journey was calm and the roads were almost vacant at this hour. As I made my way to our home, I remembered my chat with Megan about letting go and moving ahead. For years, I'd been trying to hang on to what Sophia and I had, believing that if I was patient and understanding enough, everything would fall back into place. But maybe it was the incorrect strategy. Perhaps the fact was that I needed to confront the realities of our circumstance and make some painful choices. I drove into the driveway and noted that the home was dark save for a small light in the living room. I parked the pickup truck and waited for a bit, the engine idling as I collected my thoughts. Finally, I switched off the ignition and went inside. The door creaked as I opened it, and I was faced with stillness. I put up my coat, took off my shoes, and approached the living room. Sophia was seated on the sofa, her stance stiff and arms folded. The only light in the room was from a little table lamp beside her, which threw a pale glow on her face. "You're home," she said, her voice flat. "I am," I said, taking a few steps into the room while maintaining a space between us. "You said we needed to talk." Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly. I came to the restaurant, she said. I was going to surprise you, but then I saw you with that woman. Who is she, David? I took a big breath. Her name is Megan. We met at the restaurant. She was supposed to be on a date, but her plans fell through, just like ours did. We ended up talking and sharing a meal. That's all. That's all, she said, with a harsh tone. You looked pretty cozy for it to be just a random meal. I resisted the impulse to get defensive. Sophia, I waited for you for over an hour. I didn't even know if you'd show up, and when you texted that you were staying at work and getting takeout, I didn't think I'd care, did you? She said. You didn't think I'd mind if you spent our anniversary with someone else? I shook my head, trying to keep my voice quiet. It wasn't like that. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't about trying to hurt you. But, Sophia, we've been drifting apart for a long time. You know that as well as I do. She stood up, arms crossed hard over her chest. And what? You've given up now, is that it? You're ready to just walk away. The frustration I had been holding all night came to the surface. You've been walking away for years, Sophia. I cursed. You've put your career ahead of everything, our marriage, the kids, everything. I've been patient. I've tried to understand. But I'm exhausted and am tired of feeling like I'm the only one who still cares. Her demeanor wavered, with wrath and hurt blazing in her eyes. That's not fair, David. You don't know what it's been like for me, the pressure, the expectations. I didn't choose my career over you or the kids. I was just trying to keep things together. Well, it hasn't worked, I said sadly. We're not together anymore, not in any meaningful way. I don't know if we can fix this, and honestly, I don't know if I want to try anymore. Sophia took a step back, as if I had physically hit her. The room appeared to get colder, and the stillness stretched out uncomfortably. For a minute, none of us spoke. She let out a nervous breath. Do you want a divorce? She questioned softly, just above a whisper. I closed my eyes and tried to find the proper words. I don't know, I acknowledged. I don't know what I want, or what would be best for us or the kids. But I do know that something has to change. She nodded slowly and placed her attention on the floor. We'll talk more in the morning, she added, her voice full with passion. She turned and walked out of the room without saying anything further, leaving me standing there, feeling both relieved and sad. I sunk onto the sofa, rubbing my face with my hands. The talk had been unpleasant, but it was essential. For the first time in years, I felt like I had spoken truthfully, as if I had allowed myself to accept that our marriage was on the verge of collapse. It was a step, but I wasn't sure if it was towards reconciliation or separation. As I sat there in the silence, I thought of Megan again. Her words reverberated in my mind sometimes, letting go is the only way to move forward. I had no idea what lied ahead for me, Sophia, or our children, but I knew I needed to find a road to happiness, even if it meant letting go of what I previously thought would continue forever. With that thinking, I rose from the sofa and went to bed, the weight of the day gradually lifting. Tomorrow would bring more tough talks and uncertain decisions, but for today, I'd relax. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered whether Sweetheart's Day had marked the beginning of something new. The following morning came slowly, with the first rays of dawn peeking through the curtains. I awoke with a faint aching in my chest, as if the weight of Sophia's speech the night before was still weighing on me. As much as I feared the confrontation, a little part of me felt relieved that the tension had finally been expressed. I woke up, washed, and dressed discreetly, not wanting to bother anybody. As I made my way downstairs, I heard a faint murmur of voices coming from the kitchen. Sophia was already awake, whispering quietly to the children. I lingered outside the door, listening to Nathan's upbeat speech and Grace's chuckle. Their voices served as a reminder of what was at risk. I took a big breath, pulled the door open, and went inside. The children were sat at the breakfast table, while Sophia was behind the counter, preparing coffee. She looked up at me, her face guarded. "Morning, Dad," Nathan exclaimed, his face lighting up as he saw me. "We're eating pancakes. Mom led us to help mix the batter." "Yes, I made the best ones," Grace chimed in, holding out a misshapen pancake. "See? That looks great, sweetie," I told her with a brief grin. "Good job, both of you." I looked at Sophia, who was pouring coffee into 2 cups. She held one out to me as a modest gesture of goodwill. "Coffee?" she asked quietly. "Thanks," I said, accepting the cup from her. We remained there for a time, an unsaid ceasefire between us, while the kids continued to eat. It was a little respite, but we both realized we needed to resume the talk we began last night. Sophia and I returned to the kitchen after breakfast, and while the kids were watching cartoons in the living room, she leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and I could see she was bracing herself for what was coming. "So, about last night," she started tentatively. "I know things haven't been going well between us for a long. But I don't want to make impulsive choices, David. I don't believe either of us does." I nodded. "I agree. But we must be honest about where we are. We can't keep going like this and pretend everything is okay." She glanced down, her fingers softly tapping on the counter. "I am willing to attempt therapy. Couple treatment. I know we've discussed it before, but I believe it's worth giving it another attempt." I hadn't expecting her to recommend therapy again. The last time it came up, we both discounted it as ineffective. "If we're going to do this, it has to be for the right reasons," I informed myself. "Not only to put a bandage on things. It must be about determining if we can reconstruct what we had or whether it is time to let go." "I know," she said gently. "I understand I have not been the greatest partner. I let work overwhelm me and took you for granted. I still care for you, David. And about us." Her admission took me off guard. It had been a long time since she had spoken anything sensitive, anything implying remorse or a desire to improve. Part of me wanted to think that this was a watershed moment, but another part was still leery of false optimism. "Okay," I eventually said. "I am willing to give it a go. But we need to go all in, Sophia. We must be honest and confront whatever comes out, even if it is unpleasant." She nodded, her gaze catching mine. "Agreed. You'll find a therapist who can see us as soon as possible." "Good," I said, feeling both relieved and worried. "Well, take it one step at a time." With the choice determined, we sank into an uncomfortable quiet. There was a lot left unsaid, but at least we had a strategy and a direction to go in. It was the most we'd had in a long time. Sophia and I began attending Dr. Warren, a therapist, in the following weeks. The sessions were painful, leaving me emotionally spent, but they drove us to tackle our marriage's core difficulties. We discussed our developing estrangement, the animosity that had built up over time, and how our priorities had evolved. There were no fast cures, and some days seemed like we were just scratching the surface of larger issues. However, there were brief times when we were able to link. Sophia recommended we go for a stroll in a nearby park one evening after a particularly intensive session. It was a rare warm evening for early spring, so we walked in companionable quiet for a time before Sophia spoke. "David, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how we can't keep pretending everything is fine," she told me. "I see now how much I have blocked you out, and I apologize. I didn't want to admit that I was losing you." I remained silent for a minute, contemplating her remarks. It has not been easy for any of us. But I'm not sure whether an apology would enough to resolve the situation. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I am trying, David. I am truly trying. And I want you to know that I am here for us. I do not want to lose you." I liked her candor, but a part of me questioned if it was too little, too late. I was still unsure if our marriage could be entirely healed, or whether our attempts would merely delay the inevitable. I chose to be honest about it. "I'm still not sure where this is going," I said. "But I am here too, Sophia. I am here, and I am trying." We kept going, our footsteps echoing on the calm route. At this hour, the park was nearly deserted, with just a few runners and dog walkers. It was quiet, in contrast to the emotional upheaval we were experiencing. For the first time in months, we shared a feeling of timid optimism, which was frail but palpable. Meanwhile, Megan and I had maintained occasional contact. Following that night at the restaurant, she texted me a few days later to check in. There was no pressure or expectations, just a kind, "Hope you're doing okay." I liked the gesture, and we exchanged a few texts here and there, but I kept it casual, not wanting to complicate things while I was still working on my marriage. Megan's birthday loomed as the summer progressed. I hadn't forgotten about our talk at the restaurant when she made a joke about writing the date on my calendar. I wasn't sure whether it was acceptable to contact out, but I kept thinking about her and wondered how she was doing. On August 12th, I chose to send her a simple message: "Happy birthday, Megan. I wish you a good day." She wrote back a few hours later, "Thank you, David. This means a lot. I was not sure whether you would recall." "How could I forget?" I texted back. "You made quite the impression." I paused for a bit before sending the following message. I understand that things have been hard, but I'd still want to take you out for your birthday supper. No pressure, just be friends. Megan responded quickly. I'd like that. As friends. As I put down the phone, I felt an odd combination of eagerness and remorse. I wasn't sure what the evening would include or where things would go from there, but I knew I appreciated Megan's company. And it was enough for now. The weeks leading up to supper with Megan went slowly, punctuated by additional therapy sessions and Sophia and my ongoing efforts to reconcile our differences. The therapy improved our communication skills and we made some little progress. There were good days when we laughed together or had a meaningful discussion, and terrible days when old scars reappeared and tensions rose. I had no idea what would come of all this labor, but I was determined to give it a fair opportunity. Still, the prospect of seeing Megan again evoked a feeling of eagerness that I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was simply a meal with friends, after all, that was what we had agreed on, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. There was a connection between us that I couldn't deny, and even while it wasn't quite apparent where that connection would go, I was eager to find out. On the evening of August 12th, I left the home just after 6 p.m. informing Sophia that I was going to see an old acquaintance for supper. It wasn't a lie, but I was aware that it wasn't entirely accurate. Sophia nodded absently, engrossed by some business emails on her laptop, and I felt guilty. But I reminded myself that having supper with Megan did not indicate that I was betraying Sophia. Rather, I was just attempting to figure out my own route ahead, for my own benefit as much as that of my family. I arrived to the restaurant, not the one where we initially met, about 12 minutes early. It was a tiny, comfortable establishment with a welcoming ambience, situated in a quiet neighborhood. I had purposely picked it, expecting that the low-key atmosphere would provide for a relaxing evening. I was escorted to a table near the window, where the last rays of the setting sun filtered in and provided a gentle light around the area. A few minutes later, I saw Megan stroll in. She wore a bright blue dress that suited her eyes, and her hair was carelessly done in beautiful waves. She saw me and smiled, and as she approached, I rose up to welcome her. "Happy birthday, Megan," I replied, reaching in for a warm embrace. She smelt softly of lavender, which instantly put me at ease. "Thank you, David," she said, smiling warmly. "It's really nice to see you again." We sat down, and I poured a glass of water for each of us from the carafe on the table. There was a moment of uneasiness, as if we were attempting to find our feet in this strange ground. But then Megan said, her tone light and light-hearted. "So, you remembered my birthday. You didn't have to do this, you know." I chuckled. "I wanted to. And I figured you deserved at least one nice dinner out for your birthday." "Well, I'm glad you did," she said, her demeanor softening. "It's been a while since I've celebrated my birthday with anyone other than my daughter or my parents." "How's Hannah doing?" I said, really interested. "I remember you said she was starting to think about college applications." "She's doing great," Megan said. "It's a bit overwhelming for her, with all the choices and decisions, but she's got a good head on her shoulders. I'm proud of how she's handling it." "Sounds like she takes after her mother," I replied, and Megan reddened slightly. "Thanks, David," she said. "And how are Nathan and Grace? I know you've had a lot going on." "They are doing well," I said. "Nathan's getting into soccer, and Grace just started piano lessons. Keeps me on my toes." We proceeded to discuss our children, jobs, and life in general. The discussion flowed as easily as it did the first time we met. There was a comfort in being with Megan that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was different from what I had shared with Sophia. It was simple and refreshing. I found myself laughing harder than I had in months, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, I wasn't concerned about what may happen next. Megan gave me a serious look after we had ordered our dinner. "So, David," she said, her tone serious for the first time that evening. "How are things really going with you? I mean, beyond the small talk." I paused before taking a drink of my water. "It's been tough," I said. "Sophia and I are trying counseling, and we're making some progress, I guess. But there's still a lot of uncertainty. I don't know if we're really going to make it, or if we're just delaying the inevitable." Megan nodded, keeping her eyes steady. "It's good that you're giving it an honest effort. At least you'll know you tried everything, whatever the outcome." "Yeah," I said, sighing. "That's what I keep telling myself. I don't want to let the kids down. I don't want to let myself down, either." "You're not letting anyone down by being honest about your feelings," she replied softly. "Sometimes relationships reach a point where they can't be repaired, no matter how much effort you put in. It doesn't mean you failed. Her remark spoke to me on a deep level. I had been so focused on holding things together that I hadn't considered the possibility that it wasn't about success or failure, but rather about finding peace, whatever that meant. The lunch came, and we returned to lighter subjects while eating. We chatted about where we'd been and where we still wanted to go. Megan told me about a hiking trip she had made with Hannah, and I recounted an amusing tale about taking the kids camping and Nathan insisting on carrying a portable gaming system, despite my best attempts to promote real outdoor fun. As dessert was delivered, Megan gave me a serious look. "Can I ask you something personal, David?" "Of course," I said, interested. "That night we first met," she told me, "when I saw you sitting there alone, I remember thinking you looked lost. Not just in the sense of waiting for someone who didn't show up, but like you were stuck in some kind of limbo. Do you still feel that way?" I hesitated, taking a minute to consider my response. "In some ways, yes," I acknowledged. "But not as much as I did back then. Meeting you, talking to you that night, it was a reminder that there's more to life than just going through the motions. It gave me a glimpse of what it feels like to actually be present." Megan's gaze softened, and she reached across the table to place her hand on mine. "I'm glad to hear that," she answered gently. "Because you deserve to feel alive, David. We all do." We lingered at the restaurant for a little longer, completing our drinks and enjoying the environment. There was no urgency to depart, and no need to clarify what was going on between us. It was simply two individuals spending the night together, and it felt real and significant. As we stood outside the restaurant, I glanced at Megan and was overwhelmed with thankfulness. "Thank you for tonight," I said. "It was exactly what I needed." "Me too," she said. "And who knows, maybe we can do it again sometime, under less complicated circumstances." I grinned. "I'd like that." We embraced, and it seemed like a silent promise to be good to ourselves and each other, no matter what happened next. Megan got into her pickup truck and drove away, and I watched until her taillights vanished around the corner. I was left standing in the warm summer night, experiencing a combination of feelings I couldn't quite identify. When I eventually got back to my pickup truck, I sat down for a bit to think about the evening. I still had no idea what the future contained for Sophia and me, or Megan and me, for that matter. But, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't terrified to face whatever came next. There was optimism, and I was prepared to accept it. Over the next several weeks, things appeared to settle into a new routine. Sophia and I resumed treatment, navigating our relationship's ups and downs. Some sessions drew us closer together, helping us understand one another's frustrations and disappointments. However, others left us exhausted and more unsure than before. We were still fighting to find common ground and bond authentically. The process was lengthy and sometimes difficult, but we persevered, knowing that whatever occurred, we needed to give our marriage a fair chance. Meanwhile, Megan and I kept in contact, keeping it nice and casual. We met together a couple more times for coffee or lunch, always with the intention of catching up as friends. Every time we saw one another, there was an underlying agreement that we were being cautious. Megan knew I was still working on my marriage, and she respected it. But I couldn't deny that I felt at ease and comfortable with her, which seemed to flow naturally, in contrast to Sophia and my laborious attempts. One evening, after another difficult therapy session, Sophia and I sat at the kitchen table, our silence heavy. We had been debating the notion of taking a vacation from each other, a concept proposed by our therapist to allow us to focus on our unique needs. Sophia's eyes reflected the confusion I felt inside myself. "Do you think taking a vacation would assist us?" she asked calmly, breaking the stillness. Her voice was quiet and somewhat defeated. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I feel like we've worked so hard, yet we're still in the same situation. Maybe some time apart may allow us to obtain some clarity." Sophia nodded slowly, stroking the rim of her coffee cup. "What if it turns out that we're better off apart?" she murmured, her voice nearly a whisper. "What then, David?" The question hovered in the air, and I didn't have an immediate response. I stretched across the table and squeezed her hand softly. "Then at least we'll know," I responded. "We'll know that we tried everything and made the right decision for ourselves and for the kids." Sophia's eyes welled with tears, but she nodded in accord. "Okay," she said. "Let's try it. Just a quick break to see if we can gain some perspective." We decided that I would stay with a friend for a few weeks, giving us both time to contemplate. I packed a few suitcases that night, unsure how to feel about the choice. It wasn't quite a split, but neither was it a step toward reconciliation. It seemed like a stop, an opportunity to gather our breath and decide what we wanted next. The next several weeks were a surreal muddle. I moved into my buddy Michael's spare room, thankful for his support and understanding. He had been through a divorce a few years before and understood the toll it might take, so he offered me a listening ear anytime I wanted to chat. During this period, I tried to preserve a sense of normality with Nathan and Grace. I spent as much time with them as possible, collecting them up from school, bringing them to soccer games and piano lessons, and attempting to maintain consistency for their benefit. They questioned why I wasn't remaining at home, and I tried my best to explain it in a manner that made sense to them while avoiding unneeded stress. Sophia and I chatted on occasion, often regarding the kids' logistics. The chats were pleasant, but lacked the warmth of a shared life. The space between us seemed real, palpable in a manner that was both liberating and terrifying. In the thick of it all, I found myself thinking about Megan more often. We hadn't seen one other since her birthday meal, and I'd maintained my distance, knowing it wouldn't be fair to drag her into my mess. But one evening, as I sat in Michael's living room, looking blankly at the TV, I felt compelled to reach out to her, to hear a familiar voice unrelated to the burden of my marriage. I grabbed up my phone and searched through my contacts to find her name. I pondered for a bit before typing out a message. "Hi, Megan. It has been a while. How have you been?" She responded nearly immediately. "Hello, David. I am doing great, thank you. I've been wanting to contact you but didn't want to intrude. How are you?" "I'm okay," I replied. "Just taking it one day at a time. I'd love to catch up if you're available." "I'd like that," she said. "What about this weekend? We may go for a walk or have coffee. We plan to meet on a local hiking route on Saturday morning. I'd brought the kids there many times before, and there were simple routes twisting through the trees. I love the concept of being outside, where the talk could flow organically without the constraints of a more formal venue." Saturday came, and the weather was ideal for a hike, warm but not too hot, with a light wind rustling the trees. When I parked my pickup truck, Megan was already waiting at the trailhead, dressed casually in sports gear and carrying a small bag over one shoulder. She waved when she spotted me, and I couldn't help but feel relieved and happy to see her again. "Hey, David," she responded with a genuine grin. "Are you ready to hit the trail?" "I am," I said, feeling more relaxed than I have in days. "Lead the way." We began walking, the gravel road crunching quietly under our sneakers. For a time, we didn't say much, just enjoying the fresh air and tranquil surroundings. Megan eventually broke the quiet. "So, how are things really going?" she inquired, looking across at me. "It's complicated," I answered, unsure where to begin. "Sophia and I agreed to take a break to sort things out. We've been working on our marriage for months, yet we still feel trapped. I'm not sure if it will work." Megan listened closely and nodded as I said, "David, it seems hard. I can't imagine what it's like, particularly with children involved." "Yeah, it's been rough," I said. "I just feel like I'm in limbo, trying to decide whether to keep fighting for something that feels like it's slipping away, or to let it go and start over." Megan waited for a time, carefully selecting her words. "I know I've said it before, but there's no shame in making the decision to move on if it seems right. Sometimes, letting go is the most courageous thing you can do." Her words lingered in the air, resonating with me. We kept walking, and the talk alternated between serious themes and light-hearted joking. It seemed natural with Megan, as if I didn't have to fake or put on a brave front. Being with her gave me a sense of freedom, even if I had no idea where this relationship would go. We paused to gather our breath when we arrived to a lovely viewpoint. The scene spread out before us, a wide expanse of woodland and hills, with the distant sound of a river running under us. "It's beautiful up here," Megan murmured, resting against the wooden railing. "It is," I agreed, standing next to her. I haven't felt this relaxed in a long time. We stood there in comfortable stillness, the type that does not need words. I sensed a slight change in the air between us, as if something unsaid was lurking just under the surface. I turned to face Megan, and she caught my stare, her eyes showing a combination of understanding and something more. "Megan," I started, not knowing what I was going to say. Before I could continue, she stretched out and grabbed my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it seemed like a silent acknowledgement of all we had not spoken. I had no idea what the future held for us or my marriage, but standing there with Megan, hand in hand, I felt a feeling of clarity that had evaded me for months. We sat there for a little longer, not needing to describe what was going on, happy to just be in the present. As we made our way back down the path, I couldn't help but wonder whether this was the start of anything new, or merely the end of a lengthy farewell to the life I'd known before. Thank you for watching. Should David preserve his marriage or pursue Megan? Please share your comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe.